Welcome to another episode of On the Issues with Alon and Ben-Meir. Today's guest is Dr. Daniel Bar-Tal, Professor Emeritus at the School of Education, Tel Aviv University. Dr. Bar-Tal is a noted psychologist who since the early 80s has focused on political psychology and the study of the socio-psychological foundations of intractable conflicts and peacebuilding, including reconciliation. In this episode, Alon and Daniel discuss differing narratives between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs and how to bridge that gap, the decline of the Israeli peace movement, changing public opinion toward Israel abroad, and how, as they posit, the Jews have transformed from victims to victimizers in Israel.
Good morning, Danny, my dear friend. I know good morning in New York, it's late in the afternoon in Israel. How you been? How are you?
Yeah, in my normal status, in my normal feeling, it is a very tense period, and I must say that I feel sometimes that I am exiled in my own state, country,
Yeah. I think
because it's
before you go into that, I just want to first introduce you for our audience. So Dr. Daniel Bar-Tal is a professor emeritus at the School of Education, Tel Aviv University. Dr. Bar-Tal is a noted psychologist who since the early 80s has focused on political psychology and the study of socio-psychological foundations of intractable conflicts and peace building, including, of course, reconciliation. Again, I want to welcome you to this program, Danny. I know that our listeners would be extremely interesting to hear what you have to say, specifically your critically important thesis, that is how the victims, the millennials-old victims, the Jews throughout the diaspora, after a very, relatively speaking, a short period of time, have become, you are very charitable, you call them the oppressors, but I call them the victimizers. So when I begin with asking you this first question, if I may, what you are saying is absolutely critical, and specifically in the search for Israeli-Palestinian a solution to this conflict. But can you tell our audience how is it and why is it, briefly, and then we'll change your views on the subject, that the Jews have been suffered so much throughout the centuries, who've been victims, have now become the victimizer, as it was manifested specifically in the war in Gaza, where the horrific destruction and unimaginable destruction took place. 75,000 Palestinians killed, hundreds of thousands injured. How is it possible? How do you see that? How is it conceivable that we Jews turn from victims to victimizers?
it's an extremely important question. And I must really say and really warn you that it is very touchy question to the extent that Israeli Jews who touch the question and talk about genocide, they are silent, and even some of them were arrested because the process that was going on since October 7, 2023, mostly the movement was in the other direction, which means that people who cherished peace were in kind of center, changed their mind, and they become even more hawkish.
Yes.
And especially by relating the whole event of October 7 and few days into the direction of Holocaust.
Right.
So, which means that they connected it, that it's a kind of a Holocaust that Jews did not experience in their state, because even the one which was very vicious, what we call Yom Kippur War, 1973, they killed one, and there were many killed, many more than in October 7, about 2,000, 2,200 soldiers were killed, but I say soldiers. And in this particular event, it happened that the massacre encompassed also children, women, elderly. So not only soldiers. Soldiers were about 320 killed, so about 850 were civilians.
Right.
So it was the first time that civilians were killed to such an extent. And so the question was very vivid, how it happened that governments and the leaders talk never again. And here we have again a story where civilians were killed, reminding in some way the Holocaust. And it's
Danny, before you proceed, in connection with that, when you say, it is the massacre and to occur October 7, 2023, was equated to the Holocaust, which is the horror of the World War II, where 6 million Jews were killed. There's three components here that first of all, in October 7, there is absolutely nothing to compare to what happened. Well, that is equating the two events, in my view, was incorrect. It's a choice that Israeli made to make that event, to give it such magnitude, that to awaken, like us, to provoke in many ways. In my view, was more like a government being provoked to believe, the people to believe something like this has happened again, but it is far from being of the same magnitude as the Holocaust. The second thing, it's been taken out of context. That is, this happened under 56 years of occupation. So how do you, that is, this wasn't never considered. And the third component, for decades, successive Israeli governments, specifically Netanyahu's government, been portraying the Palestinian as an existential threat. And the people saw October 7 event as a part of that existential threat. Can you speak to that, for these points?
okay. Holocaust is a kind of symbol. It is what we call chosen trauma,
Right,
where Jews select a particular trauma and do not want to heal, because Holocaust or genocide happen from time to time in the history of the Western world or not Western world. And sometimes the people who are involved try to go beyond. Jews did not want to heal, did not want. They carry it as a symbol of terrible event that is going on after us and with us.
right,
So Holocaust is viewed as does not have a time framework,
right,
really. And it can happen anywhere, anytime, and they change only the enemy who can do it. So it can be Greek, that can be Romans, they can be Muslim, they can be Arabs, and all of them may perform Holocaust, and it happened. So the fact that civilians first time were killed, immediately a metaphor of it was used by Netanyahu saying it's a Holocaust. And it
Exactly.
was caught by the public that it's very, very harsh because, as I said, 850 civilians, babies, children, and men and women were killed. Murder, not killed, murder really, in cold blood. So it caught this particular synonym that it is a Holocaust, and the Jews used it. It appeared in the media, in public discourse, and repeated and repeated. And today even it is mentioned as Holocaust, as being Holocaust. And you are right that there is nothing to compare 850 people to 6 million. It's uncomparable, really, but it is used. So it does not matter. It becomes a narrative how
Yeah.
cruel Nazi, they are really labeled as Nazi as well, did such a terrible thing as being a massacre in October 7.
Right.
Now it's true, the narratives are very different. The narrative of Palestinians and Israeli or Israeli Jews are very different.
Of course.
Israeli Jews talk about the particular event of the October 7. They don't talk about the context,
Exactly.
about the history.
Exactly.
It's absolutely not related. Nobody talks about it. And Palestinians, of course, talk about the context, about the history of occupation, and they minimize to the extent that they can the event of October 7.
Right.
So the narratives do not meet. There is different emphasis, different focus on what is said by Israelis and what is said by Palestinians.
Exactly. And in your paper there, that which you just wrote, you are tracing, of course, the conflict way beyond even before Israel was created in the first place, when the Jews began to immigrate to Palestine, basically thinking this is the land being bequeathed to the Jews, and go there as if it was owned by them, regardless of who was living there. And we know subsequently the expulsion of Palestinians, 1948, etc., etc. So now, but I wanted to focus on what you specifically wrote in terms how then we just explained that is the different narratives, but both have a completely different narrative. Let us talk a little bit about the transformation that is the Jews have experienced, expulsion, persecution, discrimination, name it, and culminating, of course, with the Holocaust. And so the never again became like the mantra. This is what should ever, never happen again. But how that, from a psychological perspective, how this transformation took place from being the victims to the victimizer. That is, what is the psychological references here? How does that happen from your perspective?
I must admit, Alon, that it took time because we live in a society that is very indoctrinated by all the prime ministers except Rabin. He had a very different speeches for the time being that he was a prime minister and was talking with Palestinians. The rest of the prime ministers were looking at Arabs with suspicion with threat, and this was a leading tone for decades and decades. So when you live in such a climate, it's very hard to think differently. And only in the 70s, late 70s, and with the coming of Sadat, it was a kind of break in this perception, because you have to remember the Sadat was the Nazi of the time.
I
He
just want
was
our
all
listener
Nazi.
to, I just want our listener to know you're talking about Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, so that they know the reference to what you're saying. Sadat, continue, please. That was the
Yes,
form who was assassinated in 1974. Go ahead.
right. And here is
I
a
mean
story.
77. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
And I was in Purim. Purim is a carnival, and in 77 March, he was really presented as a Nazi Gestapo officer in the carnival, a big doll. He was dressed, and this was Sadat, Egyptian Nazi. And
Yeah.
then in November, he was accepted with the red carpet.
Right.
So you have to understand how it did happen. And it happened because the whole leadership of Israel came to greet him. The opposition, coalition, all of them they were, and eventually a peace was signed. So what does it mean? It means that within very short time you can change from being Gestapo officer to the political hero of peace. So it's hard to understand how did it happen within short time.
Except, if
But
I may, except here, the differences between the bilateral relations between Israel and Egypt is a completely different from that between Israel and the Palestinians. That is, the Israelis did not suffer hard or did not encounter the Palestinian with Egypt what they have experienced and encountered with the Palestinian. So I agree with you. The transformation here, Anwar Sadat declared clearly, I'll come to Israel and we can talk about peace. So that was critically important in that quick switch that took place within the Israeli society. But the same is not happening. Do you think this can be the same thing could happen in connection with the Palestinian, and under what circumstances?
you know it may happen, but we have a party, a very strong party, Likud, which views West Bank and Gaza Strip as part of Israel. So when the same really process happened in 1993, half of the leadership of Israel, half of the population of Israel, perceiving that the West Bank is part of Israel, did not agree to participate in the ceremony that was in September 1993, whereas in 1977 the opposition and coalition came with open hands, embracing Sadat, and this is the difference. So the narrative that was told by some of the, or great part of the Israeli, did not fit into the process that was going on, so-called peace process.
Yes, but
So
in this regard, Danny, at the time when I spoke to the Israelis, now going back so many decades, and you remember that what was the reason why Israelis opened their arms and embraced Anwar Sadat? And that is from their perspective. If we were to make peace with Egypt, then the Arab world, the rest of the Arab state, because Egypt being the strongest Arab country at the time, it still is to some extent militarily, at least speaking, that once we remove Egypt from the equation of war and conflict, then the Arab countries will no longer be able to wage a war against Israel and emerge victorious. That is the rationale. Let's take Egypt out of the equation, and then we'll be able to neutralize the rest of the Arab state. And to some extent, I think this was a successful approach. Don't you think?
Yeah, okay. There is major difference between Egypt and, of course, West Bank or the
That's the point.
Lay of the Terror.
Yeah.
You must, your listeners must understand that the ancient Jews lived in West Bank. You know, this was what we call Judah and Shomron,
Yes.
was really on in the mountains.
Right.
They did not live in the by the Mediterranean Sea, because Mediterranean Sea was occupied by Plishtim. So the center of cultural, religious life was really in the mountain, what today is the West Bank.
Right.
And on the basis of this rational narrative, most of the leaders, Zionist leader, dreamt that Israel, the future Israel, already in 20s, 30s, will be with West Bank.
Right.
So even some of the leaders like Jabotinsky, they did not argue about the West Bank because they hoped that they will get, Israeli Jews will get also East Bank, what is today Jordan.
Right.
And everyone already in the 20s, 30s, 40s even, dreamt about two things. One, that Israel will be expanded and it will include the West Bank. And second, that Arabs will be transferred, expelled in some magic way, will disappear from there. This was two important principles that they really talked about it absolutely openly.
Openly. That's right.
Ben-Gurion, Herzl, Weizmann, Ussishkin, all of them had the same idea during pre-state condition. So what I want to say in essence, that the ideas that are today performed, which means that there is ethnic cleansing, apartheid, these ideas are not new to the Jews. The
Exactly.
Zionism of 2030 was dreaming with the help of British, who expressed Balfour Declaration. Balfour Declaration never specified the borders on which the future state will be founded. And even, you know, the Declaration of Independence that was drafted by Jews in 1947, Ben-Gurion did not agree that the borders will be specified. And here the big fight with Sharet, who wanted that they will be clarified very clearly, because he sensed that if they will not be really marked in the future, he predicted, Israel will want to expand Israel and to include West Bank. He
Right,
lost, and there is no specification of the borders in the independent declaration.
right.
So what I just want to
Yeah, of
point
course.
out.
Yes, please.
So what I am claiming, that really the foundation, the principle of Israel today with Netanyahu started already in pre-state time, where the leaders who were leading Israel at that time had this dream,
Right,
expanding and somewhat expelling Arabs, which
right,
they did in the Independence War 1948, partly in 1967,
right,
200,000
right,
Arabs were not allowed to return because they ran away
right.
to Jordan, but they were not allowed to return back. And we have it now in Gaza, and we have it now in West Bank.
Right. So, the irony is this, whereas the Jews now claim after 2,000 years on some, the right to go back to the so-called ancient homeland and settle there, but the same right is not granted to the Palestinians who've been living there for centuries. I mean, that is the horrific, the injustice that exists. So I know, I always argue, imagine if every native people now come back to claim their land, the world map will not look the same at all. I mean, geographically speaking. Now, the other thing, everything you said is, of course, to the point and correct. That was a strategy, and this is what they still believe, including this current Israeli government. But that strategy, that is hoping that the Palestinian will go, expel, disappear on their own, voluntarily or by force, it did not happen, is not happening. That is still today. There are 7 million Palestinians in the West Bank, Israel, and Gaza, and there are roughly the same number of Jews in Israel itself. So the strategy of trying to get rid of the Palestinian after 78 years of Israeli independence, in my view, failed miserably, albeit this campaign is continuing. So where do we go? That is, this strategy failed. Do you agree first that the strategy of trying to get rid of the Palestinian failed?
Um, it depends in what wise you are looking, because Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and to some extent Netanyahu, are doing this exactly. The settlers attacking communities, Palestinian communities, about 100 communities, with the help of the Israeli army,
Right.
which means the army does not intervene, or it intervenes on behalf of the settlers. So it happens. So they say to themselves, it's possible. The world is silent, doesn't do any dramatic steps to stop it.
But this is changing. I mean, if you look at the international community relation with Israel, Israel has lost tremendous ground, specifically moral ground. That is, if you, I know you talk to European, they no longer see Israel the way they seen it 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, before what happened in Gaza. So Israel absolutely has been losing ground in the eyes of the international community in a bad way, including here in the United States. Nowadays, 60% of Americans actually support the Palestinian, when it was precisely the opposite. Back then, 70 to 80% were supportive of Israel. That has changed also dramatically. So Israel is not gaining. I mean, when it comes to its position vis-a-vis the international community, it has lost and continue to lose ground. And in Israel itself, notwithstanding what Ben-Meir wants to achieve, what Netanyahu wants to achieve. They are, they are here, they are now in power. It is conceivable that within 3-4 months they will no longer be in power. But the process, that is, the failure to try to get rid of the Palestinians, is still, in my view, a reality. Who can, in fact, let's say this campaign of getting rid of the Palestinian gradually through what we call it creeping annexation will continue. Is that going to succeed? And how long that's going to take? 78 years later, Israel did not succeed. What makes you think they will succeed, albeit the process continuing with the support of the Israeli military and all of and the political structure?
Now, okay, 2 points. First, it succeeds with public opinion. About 60-70% of Israeli Jews consider the criticism of the world as anti-Semitism, and they blame them for being cooperative in anti-Semites. One. So within Israel, it succeeded in a way that 30% are for annexation, and about 30% of Israeli Jews really would like to leave the situation as it is now. So within Israel, which is very important for the leaders, there is agreement. Even Bennett, who will come to opposition, he is the one that also supports a kind of annexation. Second point is that what we see is mostly public opinion in Europe and also in the United States. But the governments don't do much. So governments could do a lot in order to stop this nonsense. They could demand visa to every Israeli who comes to Europe. They could cut sport, which is very events of sport, where Israel is very interested. That happened in South Africa, where they were not allowed to play sport, cultural, etc. So the governments could do much long. I say always to students that the boycott of South Africa took about 30 years. About 30 years from 1962, the boycott started. And it lasted 30 years until eventually it was declared the change.
But
So what I see here, so it's a long process. Maybe I will be surprised for good and seeing that something is done, but Europe is moving very slowly.
It's moving slowly, but it is happening. Exactly what you're saying. It is, in fact, started to happen. Israeli artists are being rejected. Other than the scientists, with the European would like to embrace because they needed the Israeli technology, and those are scientists, specifically in the technological sector, immigrating from Israel, they are embraced by the European because they could use them. But otherwise, they are not allowing. The movement started not permitting various exchanges, cultural and otherwise, is already taking place, even here in the United States. So but I agree with you, this is a process. But the thing is, it started already. It has started already. And at least there is a correction, in my view anyway. In Israel itself, this is going to only accelerate over time. I agree. With South Africa, it took 30 years. Finally, it matured to something. And it could take a number of years, maybe a decade or more, to eventually for the Israelis to realize now we're becoming increasingly isolated. We are no longer part of the international community, and that is a big problem. But the most important thing, and I would like you to comment on that, the shift that is the most important, the most critical power that has safeguarded, protected Israel is obviously the United States.
Right.
And we've seen that continuously from administration to the next, regardless, the Democrat, Republican, that was all the same thing. And now,
Absolutely.
of course, Trump is more than anybody else. But that is also changing. Like, if there is going to be a next president, a Democratic president from a Democrat, we are already seeing within the Democratic Party tremendous amount of growing resentment of Israel because they feel that that Israel has been actually unduly influencing American foreign policy to a point. Some people saying Israel is running America's foreign policy. The White House does not has no say. I mean, they go to as far as saying that much. And here too, the support of Israel is weakening, albeit slowly, gradually, but it is weakening. So this trend started. In my view, unless Israel changes direction, it's going to continue. Don't you see that?
Yeah, you are right. There is a process. It starts with the public opinion, especially with young people, Democrats. We let's see it with the Republican, but it's as we say, agreed. So it's a process. So what will happen in the future? We don't know who will be Democrat or Republican, but I believe, yes, I agree with you 100% that it's a process, and it's a process that is very negative for Israel. And it may last, 10 years, 15 years. Eventually, I do believe, 100% I do believe, that as it happened in South Africa, it will happen in Israel. Because Israel is depending very much on the world, USA especially, and Europe. And you mentioned it. At the moment, I hear from EU that they need specific weapons. Germany even is buying, etc. So it needs to be resolved in some time until Israel will be fully pariah of the world. It will be, but not in the very near future.
Yeah, it is becoming a question, in my view, is becoming a pariah state. I want to touch on the point you mentioned, and that is Israeli public opinion. Well, you know, as a political psychologist, you know better than anyone else that the narrative, the public narrative, that is what the successive Israeli government been engaged in consistently and habitually and regularly, an acrimonious narrative against the Palestinians, portraying them as less than a human. I mean, the dehumanization of the Palestinian, which was systematic day in and day out, made it possible for the Israeli to commit this horrific atrocities in Gaza because these people are not, they are not a human being, they are less than a human being, so it's okay to slaughter them. I mean, when I hear stories, just a couple of days ago, a reporter here was walking in Tel Aviv and asking random people, what do you think what happened in Gaza, that Israelis killed 25 to 30,000 women and children, and one man said, who gives a damn? And she was actually different, even worse more than that as well. So that's apathy, that this concern exists today and will continue to exist, and it's being reinforced by the narrative that successive government engaged in. Which means, when you talk about public opinion, I want to ask you the question now. Should there be a new government that changes tune and begin to talk in terms of reconciliation? Do you think there will be switch in the public opinion of the Israeli public opinion, and what is going to take?
Okay, first, delegitimization alone started with the first Jews who came 1882
Right,
to Palestine.
right,
Those were European, educated. They look at the Palestinians, they saw falahim mostly, the farmers, and they immediately form a very negative perception, and this perception is going on until 2026.
Right.
So Arabs were always Palestinian. First, they did not call them Palestinian Arabs. Later, they changed to Palestinians, and always looked at them from above and attached all kind of labels, murderers, thieves, Nazi, etc., etc. So it is going on now at in the that Trump until recently was very much supported by Israeli public, which
Right. Right.
is right. So I believe that it's a long process to change the vision of enemy. So it doesn't happen in one day,
Of course
especially
not. Of course not.
that collective memory of Jews. You know how many soldiers were killed through the conflict? 24,000 Israelis soldiers, 24,000 soldiers, and about 3,000 civilians, in especially Second Intifada. About 1,500 civilians were killed. So there is collective memory of really that need to be changed, but does not change. None of the countries that really admitted that they did a genocide or something very similar. Japan has a problem, Turkey has a problem. Even, when Adenauer signed an agreement with Ben-Gurion in the 50s, Ben-Gurion said, maybe you can apologize. Adenauer said, no, we will not apologize for what we did. Can you imagine
Right.
6 million
Right.
Jews were killed? Only in 1972, the chancellor, who was at time, really apologized by kneeling before the sculpture of ghetto Warsaw heroes. Yeah. So this is a problem that countries have difficulty, great difficulty, to admit into massacre, and they continue to deny to do it. In Israel at the moment, nobody can say it was genocide, even massacre, ethnic cleansing. Everyone who says it is, and not everyone, but it is arrested. He is arrested or she is arrested. So it will have to probably pass the decade until we will realize
Yeah.
what was going on after 27th of October, when the Israeli army entered to Gaza. It's very difficult for a nation which especially saw itself as a victim. Now she has to admit that really is perpetrator. It's not simple psychologically.
That's right. You're absolutely right. When you say, and of course, many Israelis were killed over the various conflicts going back to 1948. Many Israeli civilians were killed just the same. Uh, but what is not being talked about, that that Israel was not exactly an innocent bystander, and these Palestinians are just simply coming and killing Jews and killing soldiers. there was a ongoing conflict. The Jews, as a colonialist, came in to take the land of the people who have been living there for centuries and centuries. So when Israeli soldiers or civilians are killed in a conflict, where the Palestinians too justify that. They justify it because this is my land. You come to throw me out of my land. What am I supposed to do? If you were in my shoe, if the Jews were there and the Arab would come in to try to expel the Jews from there, well, you can imagine what would be the Jewish reaction just the same. So it comes down to you and I, we've been focusing for years and years and years. And that is, I don't see a solution to the Israeli politics to this day, in spite of everything that's happened over the last 80 years. There'll be any solution short of a two-state. However, people say it's buried, will never happen, it's not going to happen. Because as we see today, the relation between Israel and the Palestinians has reached a new low, a new nadir, a new low. That is, Israel failed miserably in its strategy to get rid of the Palestinians, and so did the Palestinian strategy of resistance also failed miserably, which means as I look at the conflict today and ask myself the question, okay, where do we go from here? Public opinion matters, but the same public opinion matters among the Palestinians. We have to remember that. So there's also their public opinion, albeit they are less recognized, less organized than the Israelis. So where do we go from here, given that to the great extent, even though Israel is making small incremental gains in the West Bank, territorially speaking, pushing the Palestinians, but we're talking about hundreds, we're talking about thousands, we're not talking about the millions of Palestinians that can conceivably be expelled. Where do we go from here, Danny? You live in Israel, you hear what the Israelis are saying, and you are extremely eloquent in understanding where do we go from here?
Okay, you know that the younger people of Israel are more racist, nationalistic, religious than the older generations. So this is the trend. The trend is because of the demographic changes. Religious people are, most of them, 90% hawkish. And the second reason is that the educational system does not touch the problematic parts of the history, and they learn a lot of about Jewish identity, about history from the point of view of Jews. So and look what is going on. The next opposition, which is up to election. So let's assume that Bennett wins, Eisenkot wins, Lieberman wins the next election. They are not dramatically different from
Right.
Netanyahu,
Right.
especially Bennett, but also others. So I believe that it's a kind of process of rewaking, that it will be under the pressure of the world. It's very important that Jews have to feel that they are punished for what is going on. Jews don't know what is going on. You know, they complain why the universities are boycotted. Universities are boycotted because they are interwoven into the army system.
Right.
Physics department, chemistry department contribute weapons, develop weapons, lasers that go later to the army. Everything is the army and society. This is a very important point, Alon. Is
Right.
absolutely interwoven. You
Right.
see, I go to the army at the age of 18. I serve up to age 50, etc., in reserve. My child, my son, goes to the army when I am, let's say, 40. We go together. The units meet themselves all the time. There are social events related to the service in the army. This is militaristic society with
Mhm.
full meaning of what I say.
Exactly. I
So
agree.
you need a process that will begin. I don't know. It does not be. It a little bit began about 3 years ago, where the pilots say that they refuse to fly and bomb. But when the war erupted, all of them came back. And what did they do? They destroyed Gaza. 80% Gaza is in rubbles. So who? The pilots contributed very much. And this is the problem. The problem is that the next generations are hawkish, Israeli society is hawkish, and it must change. Must change. But how does it change?
Well,
It changes.
you named it. Well, the starting it. We said international pressure. I think that is beginning. It is forming. It's
But it
taking a place.
takes
It's going to
time.
take time. It's going to take time. What else do you think can help? I'd like to.
Education, education,
Who can affect that? Who
education
can change that?
must
But
change.
I agree. But who can change that? What is
You
going to
know,
take?
it started to change in 1993. The Minister of Education at that time was Amnon Rubinstein.
Yes,
And he came to me and say, you will be responsible for changing the education to education for peace. And I started to work on this, how to change the system. It's not one school, two school.
of
We are
course.
talking about millions of students.
Right.
And Rabin was assassinated, and when came the new Minister of Education, he abolished all what Amnon Rubinstein was doing. So we need a Minister of Education who can move the system also, take out of many elements that are religious related and bring democracy, human rights, liberalism. You know, this is what we need.
Do you feel?
You have to abolish censorship. Censorship.
Do you feel, Danny, there is something is growing in this area that is people are in Israel itself. I know that the opposition, it be that let's say Netanyahu, that Bennett win there, it's likely that he will become the next prime minister, but he's not going to change much. I agree with you 100%.
Right, right.
But do you,
So
in terms of education, do you see any prospect of something growing within Israeli society under the
I don't
current
see, no, no,
under
no.
the current environment? So what need to change to bring about at least a start of changing the education system to begin to enlighten the Israeli that what is happening is basically they were led to believe something which is not true. The Palestinians are not animals. They're human beings. They are, and when it comes to
This is
intelligence,
the
they're just
beginning.
as good as any Jew for that matter, as far as I know,
Right, right.
if just the same. So, and you see no prospect in the kind of circumstances that something is going to come up from within Israel in terms of,
It slowly comes. We need humanize, personalize Palestinians. What was done in 90s, we have to repeat. So it's not that we are inventing completely something new procedure. It was already in acting. So we have to return. We know how to do it. There was a committee during Yuli Tamir term as the Minister of Education, that we said there was a public committee and I was a member and we were 9 people and we thought how to change the stereotypes at the beginning.
Right.
And again, happens the same thing. Sar became Minister of Education and he threw away all the materials that we wrote.
Right, right. So we mentioned international pressure, education, which is in a very, if there's anything changing, it's very at the very, very start. Is there anything else from your perspective that can impact, that can affect some change in the Israeli thinking about the future with the Palestinians, other than
Leaders.
what
We
else?
need new leaders. There
Leadership.
are leadership that will navigate Israel into completely different arena. And this is a possibility. We see, young people, young leaders. Some of them will be selected maybe to Knesset. It's a long process, Alon. It's not within a year something that can be done. It's a process.
This is true, but the damage is being now is continuing. The
Yeah,
damage, that. Do you
better.
think that since this going to be, it's a process going to take a long time, while at the same time the damage is getting worse by the day? Do you think it's going to be a time where there's going to be some kind of equilibrium? That is, there's a change in Israel that it is going to be faster and accelerate beyond the damage that is taking place on a day-to-day basis. That is, there's got to be a shift. Is that shift possible? I know it will take years, but is it possible given that this government, that is, unless there's a new government, at least begin to slow what this corrupt government of Netanyahu is doing, slow that the process, rain on the settlers, stop the atrocities taking place, continuing to this day in Gaza. Do you think let's just say there's Lapid Bennett do form a new government? Do you think at least they'll begin to ease at least this kind of pressure? They'll rain on the settlers. Do you think is such a possibility?
Here, it's a story, but about 10 years ago, I talked with a general by name Mitzna.
Yes, I know.
You don't remember
I
him.
know whom.
10
Yes,
years ago. And he said, you know what, Danny, I am terribly terrified that high officers will be settlers, people that are religious. This is a danger, terrible danger to Israel. And here it is, 10 years past, and it happens.
right,
Settlers become generals, settler become the head of Shabak, settler become head of Mossad. This happened, what he was much afraid, it happened. So you must kind of change the consciousness of the public that a new forces will come. There is talking about, but it's very difficult to do, to change Goffman and Zini and that are really today leading the security of Israel because they're hawks. They want to do ethnic cleansing. They are doing ethnic cleansing. So it's a very difficult situation. But the solution is that Israel cannot exist without external help. Cannot. So the pressure from outside is very, very important. We live in certain way, which also is bad, as a kind of island, air carrier as the Western countries are saying, that we are air carrier for the West, really. It must change. All must change. And this does not take a short time.
Yes. With this note, it's already an hour. I can't even believe it, how fast this went. Danny, how can I thank you enough for taking the time and imparting with your very important views on this sad, tragic chapter in Jewish history. We can only hope things will shift, however gradually, however slowly, that things eventually will shift, because still there's no prospect for Israel to ever live in peace and have complete security without finding a solution to the Israeli
Yeah,
problem.
I hope to and believe that will happen. I really believe it's a slow process. Probably, maybe I will not live then, but I see youngsters who become kind of enlightened and struggle for a democratic and liberal Israel. They will bring the solution.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Danny. Thank you so
Thank
very,
you.
very much
Thank you
indeed.
very much.
I look forward. Maybe we should have another conversation in a few weeks or a couple of months.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks again. All the
Bye
best
bye.
to you. I appreciate that very, very much. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode on the issues. You can find this podcast on my SoundCloud page, and stay tuned to my social media accounts for the latest analysis and announcements.